One tip or unique mechanic about every ability in the game. This is gonna be a long one, so let's go straight into the video. Let's start with Reyna, Devour. When you use Devour, you need to keep in line of sight with the orb, otherwise you'll stop healing. However, you can in fact stop the line of sight for a brief second to reposition yourself. Handy mechanic for small boxes, and for big boxes you can actually jump in between the boxes, so you stretch the time just enough to get to the other side. The second ability of Reyna is Dismiss, and did you know that you don't have to look at your orb to use this ability? Especially beginner players, they always try to look at the orb to use Dismiss. You don't need to do that. Leer, also known as the Reyna Flash. This one is pretty cool. Take a look at this clip. Yup, you see it right. If an enemy is standing between her flash and you actually be able to see the enemy. Another reason why you should use your flash either very high or very low. And then her ultimate, if Reyna pops her ulti and she uses her dismiss, she gets invisible, right? Oh no, where's Reyna? Where do I need to look? Well, my friends, even though Reyna gets invisible, you will still be able to hear Reyna. So use your ears to guess where she is, and easy peasy kill for you. KO. First ability is Flash. The KO Flash will explode faster if you use the right click instead of the left click. You can see it in the background. Left click 1.6 seconds, the right click 1 second. This means that usually if you want to go for the pulp flash, the right click is better. However, my friends, a while ago they changed this mechanic a little bit, and now when you use your left click and your flash bounces against the wall, it will flash a little faster than usual. This means that at this moment, if you want to go for the pulp flash, I think using your left click early against the wall is the best way, because if you use your flash like this, it will explode behind you while you are peeking. Stop using your KO knife immediately at the start of the round. Why do people keep doing this? I just don't understand. It's one of the most obvious things in Valorant. The KO Molotov does more damage in the middle than on the sides, so keep this in mind when creating lineups. And finally, if KO dies in his ultimate, there are actually multiple ways to move KO's body to a safe spot. The most useful way being a Raze Satchel and an Astra Star, but I mean, if you want to use a Breach ultimate, that's also possible, I guess. Chamber. Did you know that when you equip the chamber gun, your first bullet is always accurate if you're standing still? Doesn't matter if you sprayed before with another gun. This in combination with an equip time of only 0.3 seconds means that you can go for the double tap if you shoot with your shadow first, press your ability and immediately go for the second shot that's very accurate. The next ability is the Chamber Teleporter, and this one is pretty cool because there's actually a loophole how you don't get any cooldown on this ability. Normally when you place down Rendezvous, yep, it's called Rendezvous, I didn't know that. Oh, I sound French, bonjour. But if you place down Rendezvous and you retract it, you get a cooldown of course, right? But here's the thing, if you use your Rendezvous, you will also get a cooldown, but this cooldown doesn't reset if you retract your Rendezvous before the cooldown is over. What, MrLowlander? I don't understand. Well, take a look at the background. If I retract my Rendezvous before the cooldown of me teleporting goes over, the cooldown doesn't reset and I can almost use it immediately again. However, if I first wait for 5 seconds and then I retract the Rendezvous, then the cooldown does reset and I have to wait very long before I can place it again. So make sure to retract your Rendezvous in time. The Chamber Trademark. For this one, there's a loophole to use it multiple times in one round. I know, sounds crazy OP, right? But here's what you gotta do. Usually when an enemy gets spotted by this ability, you can't use it again in the same round. However, if you place down your trademark somewhere and you retract it as soon as the alarm goes off, then the enemy doesn't get slowed, but you get the info and you can reuse this ability. And finally, for the Chamber Ultimate, same mechanic as the Chamber Gun. Since it's very quick to pull out this ultimate and the first shot is accurate, you can go for a nice double tap if you use an operator with his ulti. A little bit overkill though. Phoenix, if you look diagonal up in the sky, walk forward and throw your molly, it will always land at the edge of your noise barrier. I think you already knew about this trick. Curveball. For this ability, a tippy. When players are using the Phoenix flash around the corner, they often stand against the wall and then use their flash like this. In the end, using your flash like this does the job, but you give the enemies a lot of time to react. So instead of standing against the wall, I would recommend to stand a little bit away from the wall and use your flash with an angle. By using this method, the enemies will have less time to react, and this can really make a difference in the higher ranks. Blaze. My friends, don't forget that you can curve the Phoenix wall. This is actually a very strong part of the ability that not every Phoenix player is using. And finally, about the Phoenix ultimate, if you pop this ability but you don't see any enemies, remember that when you teleport back, you can still curve your mouse so you can look around the wall. You might be able to spot a rat with this tactic. Okay, we go to Viper and start with the Poison Cloud. Did you ever try to throw your Poison Cloud down, but it just flew away like this? Again? What is that for stupid mechanic? It actually happened to me so many times. So big tip, if you want to throw it close to you, just use your right click button, because then there's less chance that it will bounce away to the other side. Toxic screen. Stop using your toxic screen at the start of every round. Honestly, your wall is also very strong for the retake, for example, so consider saving it so now and then. Snakebite. A mechanic about this ability that a lot of people forget is that this Molotov also makes the enemies vulnerable. Vulnerable? vulnerable. That's actually a pretty hard word to pronounce, sorry. Anyway, this means that if you use it somewhere behind the smoke or a wall, you can simply spray and pray, and there's way more chance that you get a random kill because your bullets do more damage. And finally, for the Viper ultimate, a lot of players stay in the Viper ultimate if they use this ability, but don't do that. The Viper ultimate is all about timing, and if you know when to walk in and out of it, you'll become a very good Viper player. Next agent, Deadlock. Let's start with the Sonic Sensor. This ability is able to trip enemies through walls. This means that on Ascent, for example, if you place your tripwire over here, it can trip the enemies in a main. You don't always want that because you might waste this ability then, so instead of placing it on this wall, it might be better to place it over here. Grefnet. This is a strange ability because the Grefnet can slow way more things than you first expect. At first you might think, okay, this ability probably just slows agents, right? But no, it also slows other abilities. Abilities that make sense, like a Wingman or a Fate Prowler, but also abilities that absolutely don't make any sense, like the Tahoe missiles. Is the useful mechanic? Probably not, but a cool mechanic to know. The Deadlock Barrier. For this one, a tippy. A lot of players are using the Deadlock Barrier as a sage wall. You know, they place it somewhere at an entrance so the enemies can't push. And I think this is not the ideal way to use this ability. Instead, throw your barrier a little deeper than normal. This way you either trap the enemies or you split them up. So after that, play aggressive with your teammates for easy kills. And finally, your ultimate can hit enemies through walls. This means that if an enemy is sitting behind this red corner, for example, you can just use your ult through the wall. Sage now. Let's start with their slow orb. When you throw down the slow orb on a spot where it can't really spread out, it will spread out in the length instead of the width. What do I mean with that? Well, if you throw it on rafters, for example, the slow orb will cover a way bigger part of it, so keep this in mind when throwing it down. Next ability, Healing Orb. When you heal yourself with Sage, you only heal 50 HP, while if you heal an ally, you will heal 100 HP. So common sense, my friends, if you and your ally are low HP, just heal your teammate and don't be one of those greedy players. Next up, we have the Sage Ball. Honestly, for this ability, I can give tons and tons of tips, show you a lot of good Grim plays that I did in the past, but instead I will show this clip. Whoa! And give the tip that you shouldn't be planting the spike too close to the Sage wall. Whoopsie. And finally, as for the Sage ultimate, controversial tip, but it's actually a pretty good one. When you use your ultimate on a teammate, try to use that teammate as bait and easy peasy kills. Okay, Vice. Wanna tilt the enemies? All you gotta do is plant the spike in a corner, place your wall very close to the spike so that if the enemies are trying to defuse, they won't be able to get out of it, and then let a teammate use a molly on the spike. I would definitely be very tilted if someone did this to me. Arc Rose, also known as the Vice Flash. Something I recently discovered is that you can place the Vice Flash on the ground. I know, maybe common knowledge, I have no idea, but I never played Vice, so I never knew about it. But this is actually a handy trick, because if you think the enemies are gonna push you, you place your flash down on the ground behind you, activate it at the point that the enemy is gonna peek, and if you do this correctly, the enemy will have no time to react, because they don't see the flash, you know, and that's how you can get an easy kill like in this clip. Razorfine, underrated strategy. Use your Razorfine on a small elevation, for example these boxes on Abyss or this hill on Lotus. Activate it while standing behind it, then don't move, and because of the Razorfine you will be hard to spot, while it's easy for you to spot the enemies.
Good hit. My point is dead.
Oh wait, this is actually
And then we go to the Vice ultimate. I got one quick and simple tip for this one. If you use your ultimate, be careful for the shorties. Okay, we're going to my voice doppelganger now, Sofa. At least some comments say that. I don't really see the resemblance, but one day when a Dutch agent comes out, maybe I can find my twin agent. Shock Dart. For this ability, I don't really have a unique mechanic, but what I do have is a tip for all the beginner Sofa players, because I see this time and time again, even in Diamond Elo, and that's that some players use 2 Shock Darts back to back on the same spot. This is such a common mistake. Every time I see one Shock Dart landing somewhere, I just don't stand on that spot because I can expect the second Shock Dart landing 2 seconds later. And if you want to shoot 2 Shock Darts at the same spot, try to learn some double Shock Dart lineups so they land on the same moment. The Wreck and Bolt. Here's a huge tip that I also recently discovered. Imagine you're defending with Sofa and the enemies are about to push your side. Where and when do you use your Wreck and Bolt? Many players will use their Wreck and Bolt into a main to get info about the enemies. And yes, maybe you get some info so your teammates can rotate earlier, but this is not the ideal moment and spot to use your Wrecking Bolt. Instead, a way better way of using the Wrecking Bolt is to wait till the enemies are committing the push and then use your dart somewhere at the entrance of the site, like on this wall. The reason why this type of Wrecking Bolt is way stronger than the first one is that if the enemies are pushing, they don't have time to look back and destroy it, so it will give you a big advantage to defend the site with. Sofa drone, a simple tippy. You can fly higher with the drone if the ground underneath you is higher, so use boxes and walls to get the maximum height. And finally, the Sofa ultimate. If you use your Wrecking Dart ultimate combo, A lot of players would aim at where they see the enemies through the wall and then shoot their ultimate on that spot. This is not the optimal way to use this ulti. Here's what you gotta do. If you see an enemy through the wall, aim a little bit to the left or right of that enemy. By doing this, the enemy will think that they are safe, but while you are shooting, you're turning your ultimate to that enemy. This way they have less time to react, so it's easier to get some kills. Next agent is Cypher, and let's start with this cage. Take a look at this clip.
Cage triggered.
Yup, my friends, I think this is a very underrated Cypher strategy. If you got the time, hop into a custom game and try to learn throwing your cage next to an entrance so that it looks for the enemies that the entrance is blocked, but in fact there's a small angle where you can see through. It's a very sneaky trick. Spy cam. There's a mechanic with this cam that not a lot of people know about, and that's that you can tag multiple enemies with one dart. I have no idea how it exactly works, but there are some clips where you can clearly see that one dart tags multiple enemies, and hey, I don't complain. Tripwire. Whoa, wait. Trapwire? Is the tripwire of Cypher actually called trapwire? I never knew that. But anyway, you know the trick that everybody tells you, that if you crouch with Cypher, place your trapwire just above your head, then your trapwire is on the perfect height, enemies can't jump over it or crouch under it. Well, even though this is a good strategy for lurks, for example, it's not always the best thing to do. Sometimes at entrances, for example, it might be better to, instead of placing your trapwire like that, place it all the way on the ground. The reason, now when enemies are pushing and walking through it, your trap might be a little harder to find since it's not on head level. Now the ultimate of Cypher. This ability is pretty straightforward, I can't give a lot of tips about it. However, I can tell you a unique mechanic, and that's that the second pulse of the Cypher ultimate also works in a Yoru ultimate. Look at this.
One enemy.
Oh! Oh, that works! The Gecko Wingman, also called his yellow blob. There are two things I want to say about this blob. First of all, if you ask your wingman to plant something, defend that wingman with your life. You don't want to send your wingman through a smoke to the side, just for the enemies to destroy it, and then suddenly the spike is in the enemy territory. I made that mistake a few times, whoopsie. However, my friends, if you ask your wingman to plant something, and you know for sure it's safe, then it's the perfect time for you to take the orb. Very underrated strategy. Planting and taking the orb at the same time will give you 2 ultimate points, and that could be very useful in the post plant. Dizzy. Did you know that Gecko can flash himself? Usually when you throw Dizzy in the sky, it will not target Gecko, of course. However, if Gecko is standing next to an enemy and Dizzy hits that enemy, Gecko will also be flashed. Mosh pit. By now it's common knowledge that the mosh pit has the same trajectory as the Killjoy Nanoswarm and the KO Molotov. However, a thing you need to keep in mind is that the range of the mosh pit is way bigger than both of these abilities. This means that yes, you can use the same lineups, but since the mosh pit is a little bigger, it's better to tweak those lineups so that you use more of the mosh pit's range. As for Thresh, the Gecko ultimate, where you jump towards an enemy, you can use Thresh again, and then you will explode mid-air. Use this if you think you're about to jump past an enemy. Next agent, Teho. Let's start with his stun. Underrated mechanic, but it's also important. If you're about to use his stun, you need to know that your stun will hit enemies through walls. Knowing this piece of information, your stuns will land way easier. Next ability, Guided Salvo. If you notice that the enemies are standing underneath the platform, then no worries, you can just use your Guided Salvo on the platform and the enemies underneath it will get hit. Doesn't matter how high it is. It even works all the way from heaven on A. Stealth drone. If you jump and then place down your drone, the drone will get a little more height. This mechanic is useful if you want to go for a pop drone for information, or if you want to place down your drone on high spots where you usually can't reach. And then his ultimate. I've said this a lot during the Teho to Ascendant series, but for those who missed it, if you use your ultimate, you need to look at your ulti in 2 sections. The hit section and the reposition section. Because it takes so long for your ultimate to reach the end, enemies standing in the reposition section probably will have enough time to run out of your ulti, and that's why you shouldn't be expecting to hit enemies with the end of your ultimate. So keep this in mind when placing it down. Bobber break. Shout out to all the Bobber fans out there. If you like this video this far, don't forget to subscribe. You will make me and Bobber, of course, very happy. Brimstone. First up, Incendiary. Did you know that you can almost always hit the spike with your Molotov from anywhere on every map with this simple lineup? All you gotta do is look in the sky towards your spike, then cast the smoke exactly on the spike, aim at the point where your smoke appears in the sky, and shoot your molly. I have no idea how it works, but it just works. Your molly will always land on the spike like this. Unless, one exception, there's an object between you and the spike. So don't use it over here on split, because there's a big building in between. Next one, Sky Smoke. For this ability, I want to tell a fact, and that's that this is the longest smoke in the game. 19.25 seconds to be exact. And since you got 3 of these smokes, you can actually block off a path like A short for more than the half of the round. Imagine that a certain spot is smoked for like 1 minute. It's very hard for the attacker side to push after that because they don't have a lot of time left, so keep that in mind. The real strength of the brimstone smoke is that it's so long. Stim beacon. If you want to use your stim beacon in a pistol round, you have to keep in mind that there's only one pistol that has a quicker fire rate, and that's the frenzy. Of course, with the other pistols you will have a quicker reload, but the frenzy will work together the best with your stim beacon, so in the eco round, consider getting that frenzy. And for the brimstone ultimate, I want you to take a look at this clip. Yup, my friends, the Brimstone ultimate actually does less damage on you than on the enemies, which means that you can walk through your own ultimate to reposition yourself. It's a very risky trick, but I mean, it's very cool if you get a kill with it. Killjoy now. First up, alarm bot. Stop placing your alarm bot just around the corner. Many players, including me, did this because it makes sense, right? Because you want to hide your alarm bot. But no, my friends, this is bad because if you hide your alarm bot around the corner, enemies will be able to get close to the alarm bot and it's easier for them to hear it. Instead, place your alarm bot a little behind the entrance, somewhere in the middle. Since it's invisible, the enemies won't be able to see it, so it's hard for them to destroy it. And now when the enemies get close, they won't hear the alarm bot immediately, so it's just better overall. Turret. When placing down your turret or your setup overall, you basically have two options, an aggressive setup or a defensive setup. With an aggressive setup, you place your turret so it spots enemies early. Good one for early info, and you can use your alarm bot to hold the flanks with. However, with the defensive setup, you try to hide your turret, place your alarm bot somewhere on site, and by doing this, you don't get early info, but it will be very hard for the enemies to push. Nano swarms. Don't always throw your nano swarms before the barriers are going down. In some rounds, try to save one for lineups, also on the defender side. And as for the Killjoy ultimate, push a little bit before your ultimate goes off. This way you can get control over the site before the enemies have time to come back. However, when you do this, you need to be careful for some reds that might be still in your ultimate, but this risk is definitely worth it because getting the site early is just so good. Okay, let's run to the next agent now, Neon. I have no idea what that was, sorry. But high gear, the Neon run. Usually when you want to rotate, you hold your knife and you start rotating. This is a habit that a lot of players have because of course you run faster with your knife. However, with Neon, it's a very bad thing to first pick up your knife and then start rotating with your E ability. The reason, now when you dash, you will have your knife in your hand. Very dangerous. What you could do is dash and then quickly pick up your gun, but when you do that, you will start shooting later. So my friends, big tip, don't pull out your knife before you start running. Don't think you can get rid of this habit? Then there's a small bonus tip. If you go to settings, controls, equipment, scroll a little bit down, you can find this button, auto equip prioritize. By default it's on the left, but change this to strongest, and now when you walk with your knife in your hand and you dash, you will pick up your gun anyway. Relay bolt. It doesn't matter how high you hit your stun, it will always hit the ground. This means that you can go for some insane lineups, for example aiming at the top of a high building and still hit the enemies underneath it. Fast lane. When you try to use your wall against a wall or boxes, there often will be a small gap at the end of it. Sometimes it's nice to shoot enemies through that gap, but if you don't want that gap, all you gotta do is try to aim over the boxes or the wall, and then it will close shot. And then the Neon ultimate. Of course, you can keep moving while using your ultimate and still be accurate. However, a thing you should be careful of is that you can't jump or fall while being accurate. Then the ult just goes everywhere, so I wouldn't recommend to jump around the corner unless you know the enemy is very close to you. Astra, the only agent with kinda 5 abilities if you really think about it. She has 5 ability icons, so I count it as 5. First up, her stars. A tip about the stars is that you don't have to use an ability on their star to make a star useful. What do I mean? Well, 2 examples. If you're planning to push B with your team, you could for example place a star on A. The enemies might spot that star and think, oh, they're gonna push A, but instead you're pushing B, so you might delay the enemy's rotate. And the second way is that if you place a star in a red corner for example, and an enemy sees that, there's less chance that they will stay in the red corner, so using stars on certain spots might scare some enemies away from that spot. Gravity well. Here's a mechanic about this ability. If you ever get stuck in one, you can try to shift walk out of it, and when you do that, you will stay accurate while shift walking. It's a strange mechanic, but it works, I guess. Nova Pulse. This is a stun. And for this one, I actually don't really have a tip. Just use it on red spots, I guess. Nebula/Dissipate. If you activate this ability, you will get a smoke. However, if you press F, the smoke won't stay, but it will stay for a little bit. And at small time you can use. If you get the chance, place your star somewhere, use Dissipate, and then quickly go to the other side while the smoke is coming down. Because the smoke was only there for like 1 second, the enemies might not think that you've crossed, and that's how you could get some sneaky plays. As for the Astra ultimate, no, you can't shoot through her ulti, but yes, you can knife through her ulti. Next agent, Clove. Let's start with Metal, also known as her decay. Even though it looks like Metal goes through walls, a bit like the Teho stun, this ability in fact doesn't go through walls. It only hit enemies standing in line of sight. And this, my friends, can be very annoying sometimes, because if there's a very low wall like over here on Breeze, the enemies on the other side won't get hit. And you could take this mechanic even to the extreme. If we go to Haven Mid for example, example, you see the small elevation. Yup, that elevation is enough for metal to not hit the enemy. So keep that in mind. Ruse, also known as the smoke. As we all know, when you die with Clove, you can still use this ability. However, there is of course a range for the smoke. So a nice tippy, if you play with Clove, play somewhere around middle. This way you're able to smoke both the sides when you're alive, but also when you're not alive anymore. Pick me up. You killed an enemy and you're low HP now? Don't always immediately press pick me up. If there's no direct threat from the enemy, just wait a little while with pressing this ability, because the longer you wait, the longer you will stay full health when you finally press it. So with this tactic, you might still be full HP when you rotate it. And then the Clove ultimate. Here's a very cool mechanic that not a lot of people know about. In this round I did some damage to Omen, lost the battle, so I used my ultimate. But after that, something cool's happened. Look at this.
Back like I never left. One enemy remaining.
You saw that? I got saved because my teammate killed Omen. However, I did not do any damage to Omen while in my ulti. So this is a pretty cool mechanic. You don't have to do any damage to an enemy while in your ulti to get revived. Okay, Fate now. Let's start with C's. As we all know, Valorant is a team game, which means that you should play together with your teammates. This is something that you should always be doing. However, with the C's ability of Fate, it's even more important. I think C's is the best ability in combination with the teammate's ability like a Molotov, a nade or a shock dart. So communicate, my friends. Hunt, also known as the Fate Octopus. Yes, you don't tell me that those aren't octopus tentacles. For this ability, I got two smaller tips. The first one, very obvious, but try to throw it as high as possible. The range is pretty big, so the higher you throw it, the less chance that an enemy will destroy it. And finally, when you throw it, you see a small arrow on the ground, right? What? MrLowlander, was that arrow always there? Yes, my friends, of course I knew the arrow was there. Like, I didn't found it out during the editing. No. Okay, I gotta be honest, I never knew there was an indication until I edited this video. But this indication is very useful, my friends. If you have a hard time to guess where your octopus will land after you reuse it, then just follow the indication, and when you click on the reuse button, it will land on the arrow. Brawler, a thing that a lot of players do is hard checking every corner with this ability. And yes, I understand where they're coming from. You want to check the corners with this ability, right? But you need to know that you don't have to hard check the corner. If the Brawler only sees like a small pixel of the enemy, it will already activate and aggro to that enemy. So if you want to check a corner with the Brawler, just look at the left for like a split second and then continue. Don't waste any time. And finally, the Fate Ultimate, Nightfall. Here's a pretty important tip about the Fate Ultimate. When you use it, a lot of players will use their Brawler to get on the tracks and then push immediately. This, however, is not the smartest idea, because if you hit an enemy with your ultimate and you just activated your Brawler, the enemies won't be blind yet. So if you peek a little too early, then this might happen. Yeah, not very smart of you, Fate. Race now. First, Blast Pack. Okay, my friends, I know that the TikTok race plays are looking pretty cool. Those double jumps and triple jumps are insane, but you need to practice those in a custom game before you use them in a real game. I personally was way too lazy to practice those jumps before I started to play racing competitive. This meant that my race jumps looked like this. Whoa! And you don't want that, so a big tip for the blast packs, practice them in a custom game first. Also, small bonus tip for the desktop gamers out there, bind this ability to a mouse button and it's way easier to use because strafing in the air will be easier. And for those who are playing on console, I have a question. Is it hard to do race double jumps on a console? I honestly have no idea because I never played on a console before. Maybe I should try that out for the video. Let me know if you are interested in that. Paint shells, the race grenade. There's this one tricky I often use with this ability, and that's throwing it at one spot to push another spot. Very underrated trick, my friends. An example, if you want to push through garage but you don't have a smoke, then throw your nade into window, and while your nade is going off, push through garage into C. Okay, boombot now. There's this one thing you can do with the boombot, and that's throwing a satchel underneath the boombot, so your boombot will fly to a higher spot. Back in the day, this trick was pretty useful because your boombot's range was way longer, which means that it could check a lot of angles if you use the satchel trick, but nowadays, this trick is not useful anymore. So my tip for this ability is to not waste your satchel on your boombot. I would recommend to just save your satchel for a double jump or maybe even a quick peek, and your boombot for checking corners. And then we have a simple tippy for the race ultimate, aim for the feet of the enemies, not the body. Omen now, Paranoia, also known as the Omen Flash. But wait, Paranoia isn't actually a flash, it's a near sight. And that's my tip for this ability. Many players are using the Paranoia as a flash, using it in a small red corner and then pushing behind it. But when you do that, the enemy can simply see you. Instead, if you use your Paranoia, try to create as much distance between you and the enemy that you hit. You can do this for example with your shrouded steps for some sneaky kills from a different angle. Dark cover, the omen smoke. The reason why the omen smoke is different compared to other smokes is that if you put it in the sky, it will slowly fall down. And we can use that mechanic to get a kill. Simply place your smoke somewhere in the sky, teleport behind it, and while it's falling down, it slowly reveals the enemies. And maybe they don't expect it, so easy peasy shots for you. You can actually use this trick everywhere to make some creative one-ways.
Ik ben je snap.
Shrouded steps. For this one, a little controversial tip, but after playing Omen for multiple hours during the Omen to Ascendant series, I found out that usually the most crazy and risk-on shrouded steps are working. So don't be afraid to take risks with this ability, because if you take risks, there's a high chance that the enemies don't expect it. And then we have the Omen ultimate. There's also this one tricky that I used every game, but it worked so many times. The OG viewers might remember it, but it goes like this. If you want to use your ultimate, place your smoke somewhere deep into the enemy territory. After that, use your ulti, but don't teleport in your smoke. Instead, teleport a little bit close to your smoke. When you do that, the enemies might think that you teleport in your smoke, but in fact you're on a different spot, and then you kill the enemies that is shooting on your smoke from there. Sounds crazy and very obvious, but it really works, even in Diamond Elo. So good luck with this tricky, my friends.
They fell for it. I hear him shooting. I hear them shooting on top of the thing.
Sky now, let's start with Trailblazer. Sometimes when you're in the Tasmanian tiger of Sky, it might be a little hard to spot enemies. Maybe an enemy is in a small red corner, and you just happen to run past that enemy without noticing it. No worries, my friends. A big tip for this ability is to simply look at the minimap. If you notice an enemy icon on the minimap, you know where that enemy is and no more hiding for them. Guiding light, also known as the Sky Flash. When you hold the ability button, you can guide this flash to wherever you want. Nice to fly over buildings, for example. However, you don't have to do that. Your bird will fly around the corners by itself, so you don't need to guide it. Regrowth. This ability I want to tell a mechanic about. Some people think that if you have multiple enemies healing at the same time, you're able to heal every enemy for 100 HP. But this is not how it works. In total, this ability can heal 100, so if you have two teammates both on 20 HP, you can only heal both teammates for 50. And finally, the Sky Ultimate, Seeker. When you use this ultimate and you want to push behind it, don't push directly behind it. Often enemies will shoot on the Seekers, and when you're directly behind your cabbages, they will hit you without even aiming at you. So walk a little bit to the left or right of this ability. ISO. First ability, Undercut. For this ability, I actually don't really have a good tip or unique mechanic. It's just simply as straightforward as it gets. You think an enemy is in a red corner, use it, push that red, easy kill. You think the enemies are pushing, use it before you peek, and easy kill. A very straightforward ability. Double tap now, the ISO shield. This is also a very straightforward ability. So instead of a tip, I will tell a unique mechanic about this one, and that's this. If you notice that the enemy KO is using his ultimate, but you're just out of range, a thing you can do is activate your shield, then walk into that ulti, and look at that, your shield will stay active. The best part, if you get a kill, the orbs will still appear, so basically the KO suppression has no effect on your shield. Next ability, the Wall of ISO. If you are pushing with the Wall of ISO, the spot where you're pushing to shouldn't be at the end of your wall. What do I mean with that? Well, imagine we're on Lotus and you want to push into A main. If you're using your wall towards stairs over there, the end goal shouldn't be stairs, but you should either push into the left into vent room or to the right to side. Why so? If you push with your wall till the very end, your wall will always reach the end spot before you reach it, which means that your wall will suddenly disappear and you will be standing all the way in the open. Enemies have an easy shot on you then, so instead make sure that you walk away before your wall goes down. Makes sense, right? ISO ultimate now. A tip about this ability is that if you're planning to use it only on spots if you know for sure that your teammates are ready to follow up. The real strength of the ISO ultimate is not the 1v1 battle you can take. No, my friends. The real strength is that you can abduct an enemy from the side, which makes taking or retaking a side way easier for your teammates. So make sure that your teammates are ready to follow up. Waylay, first ability, her dash. When you play Waylay for a while, you might get into the habit of always using your double dash. And I get why. The double dash is just so much more fun to use than your single dash, because you get further, right? But my friends, don't get into the habit, because your double dash is not always better than your single dash. When you use your single dash, you can shoot earlier, so if you don't need to, use your right click. Refract now, or teleport. The best thing about Refract is that this ability is an insta escape. There's almost no animation, not like the Yoru teleport, and because of this, you can make plays that are actually way too aggressive. So the tip about this ability is that if you've used it, just go for some crazy plays like a dash that's actually way too deep and hope to kill an enemy before they are ready to react. Saturate. The tip about this ability might sound obvious, but don't forget to use it in your combo. I personally played a lot of Waylay games during the Waylay to Ascendant series, and each time that I reviewed my own footage, I found out that I personally wasn't using it at all. And I don't think that I'm the only one that makes this mistake. And then the Waylay ulti. If you're about to use the Waylay ultimate, please let your team know. When you press on her ulti, it takes about 2 seconds before it really goes off, and in those 2 seconds your teammates can walk into your ultimate and get hindered. No bueno for your team, my friends. I mean, I know, in the end it's their own fault because they walk into your ulti, but still communicate with your teammate and don't stun them. Jett, first her updraft. Don't jump and then use your updraft. You don't get extra height. But also, don't only press your updraft ability, because you also don't get extra height then. What should you do instead? Press your updraft and jump button on the same time, and then you will get extra height. Tailwind, another one of those pretty straightforward abilities. My tip for this one is that if you got the time, hop into a custom game and try to practice some super dashes. There are a lot still in the game, but I got a feeling that they get used less and less and less. I miss the old days, my friends. Cloudburst now. A lot of people struggle with this ability, because how do you use it? It's such a short smoke. Well, my friends, this is how you use the Cloudburst. You can either use it to reposition yourself, use it on the ground to get closer to the enemy, for example when you got a shotgun or something, to defuse or plant the spike. You won't be covered the whole time, but it will cover you a little bit. And finally, in rare situations, you might be able to use the Cloudburst as a one-way smoke. And then the Jett ultimate, never stand still when you're using this ability. See an enemy at the end of C, don't stand still and go woonk woonk woonk. No, my friends. Instead, just strafe to the left and right, make yourself a hard target. You'll be accurate anyway, and then woonk on the head of the enemy. Harbor, our most beloved agent, that doesn't get played a lot. I think that's a shame because he's a really good agent, but maybe some people just don't know how to play him. So here are a few tips. First, his Cove. When you throw down Cove, a lot of Harbor players will stand in the smoke because they think it's safe over there. This is sadly not true. Even though bullets can't go through the smoke, abilities can, and the smoke is a perfect circle for a Molotov. So instead, if you want to use your smoke to plant, for example, don't throw it on you and plant in it, but throw it a little in front of you and then plant behind your smoke. High Tide. If you use this ability and want to get quick cover, you can actually press on your right mouse click button and then your wall will go up instantly. Very important if enemies are pushing you. Next ability, Cascade. The countdown of Cascade disappearing starts when it's standing still. This means the longer that you let it wave forward, the longer that it will stay up. So reactivate it as the last possible moment. And then the Harbor ultimate. If you use this ability and you're not sure where the enemies are, high in the sky there will be markers to point you where the enemies are standing exactly. Pretty useful if you don't want to rely on only the sounds. Yoru now. First ability, Blindside. As you probably know by now, when Yoru uses his Blindside, the enemies won't be able to see his flash until it bounces once against the wall. This is a mechanic where we all know about, but don't use enough. If you're peeking into C main, for example, don't use your flash like this, but use it against the wall on the other side. If you do that, it's harder for the enemies to guess where you're peeking from, so it's easier for you to get a kill. Gate Crash. You might have already noticed it, but if you use your Gate Crash against the wall, it will go slower and slower and slower, right? This is not because it's slowing down, but this is because it's slowly turning, and we can use that mechanic for some crazy lineups. A well-known lineup is over here on Haven. When you use your Gate Crash like this, it will hug the wall on the left for a pretty long time, which means that it's curving more and more and more, until when it's finally at the end of the wall, it's curved all the way to the defender spawn. Insane mechanic for some sneaky lineups. The Yoru clone. If you drop all your guns before activating the clone will run with a knife in his hand instead of a gun. This also means that your clone will run faster and further. Could be useful in some situations. And then the Yoru ultimate. Did you ever get killed by an enemy Yoru that used his ultimate, flashed you, and after that used a shorty to kill you? It happened to me a lot, but why a shorty? Well, two reasons, my friends. The first one is that shorty is one of the quickest guns you can pull out, which means that if you use a shorty in the Yoru ultimate, the enemies will have even less time to react than if you pull a Vandal. And the second one is that if you don't have money for a real gun, the Yoru ultimate is the perfect ultimate to steal a gun of the enemies, just by simply running up to them with a shorty, kill them, steal their gun, and teleport back. And then we go to Breach. Flashpoint. The Breach flash is actually pretty slow, so it's easy to dodge this ability. That's why if you got the chance, use your flash through the ground. Huh? Is that possible? Yes, my friends. If you flash from a point with elevation, you can flash on the ground, and now when people are trying to dodge the flash, they will most likely look right into it, because most players are dodging a flash by looking down. Fault Line, also known as the Breach stun. Stop using this ability at the start of the round if you don't plan on following it up with something. On itself, this ability is like completely useless. It might be able to stall the enemies, but that's it. So only use this ability if you either plan on following up yourself with an Aftershock, for example, or if you got a teammate that's about to push in like a Jett. Aftershock. You think an enemy is in a corner, so you use your Aftershock on it. If you do, then don't turn around. Keep looking at it, because if an enemy is running away, it's like shooting on headless chickens. And then the ultimate of Breach, Rolling Thunder. If you jump while using Rolling Thunder, you can boost yourself a little higher than usual and surprise the enemies while they are trying to run away from your ulti. Last agent, Bobber. She doesn't have any abilities though. The only thing she can do is sleep. Anyway, this was the last agent of this video. Honestly, this is like the longest video I've ever made on this channel. So if you're still watching by now, big respect to you. I really appreciate the support. Thank you so much for watching this video. And now I will use the ability that Bobber is using. I will go to sleep. Good night, my friends. See you in the next video. Peace.